Former President Olusegun Obasanjo has again denied claims that he once sought a third term in office, insisting that there is no evidence to support the allegations. Speaking at a democracy dialogue hosted by the Goodluck Jonathan Foundation in Accra, Obasanjo declared, "If I wanted a third term, I know how to go about it." He argued that securing debt relief for Nigeria during his presidency was a more difficult task than extending his tenure, and he succeeded at that. The former president also warned against leaders clinging to power, describing it as a false sense of indispensability and a sin against God. He urged for generational change, stressing that leadership is best entrusted to the young, the dynamic, and visionary. Now, joining me is a professor of politics. Kenneth Nweke joins me to discuss the former President Obasanjo's claims. You're welcome, Professor. In your own views, how credible do you find Obasanjo's denial of seeking a third term, given the political climate at the time?
Yeah, for me, it's not too clear of, when you consider the time that happened, within the period, it was too clear that the atmosphere favored the third term bid of former President Olusegun Obasanjo. When you talk about his denial, for me, he's alive and he's speaking for himself, and I can trust him for whatever he says to an extent, because he's been able to live up to his expectations even in recent time as a former president and an elder statesman. And so for me, yes, on one hand, there's no doubt about what he has said. But on the other hand, I want to say clearly again that all of these things happened under his watch. He never said no. He never said or hushed all those who were, pushing for the third term for him at the time. So if he didn't do that, he meant that he was enjoying, the whole thing, and probably was watching for anything to happen. Probably he didn't do much in order to push it. I can agree with him to that extent that he didn't do much, assuming without considering that he wanted it at all costs. Of course, he would have pushed so much on his own side, as the president. Of course, having been an executive president of Nigeria, having enormity of powers, overwhelming powers, would use state resources, so to say, and every institution available to him at the time to make sure that there was a constitutional amendment that would allow him to run for third term. Yeah, to that extent, I want to agree with him that probably if he wanted it, he would have pushed for it, but he enjoyed it. I can tell him for free, without asking him. He enjoyed it very well. He enjoyed the joke, whether it was a joke or something that was tailored to his own benefit. He was enjoying it, but knowing too well that Nigeria pushing for third term, was very Herculean, and then it was going to also bother about constitutional amendment. Of course, he knew that it was he would find himself in murky waters and all that. Of course, that's why probably he didn't push, much, to achieving that. I can agree with him to that extent.
Now, Professor, in terms of impact, I'd like us to take a look at the impact. What impact did the third term debate have on Nigeria's democratic development and, of course, the political stability during Obasanjo's administration?
You can tell, there was a lot of disruption, because all of those conversations, slowed the pace of political development at the time, because rather than deploy resources, energies in the areas of governance and all that, a lot of politicians at the time who wanted probably his loyalists at the time, we are now pushing for those, for the third term agenda. And so distracting his government at the time, the National Assembly members who focus on legislations that should, probably there was some kind, which was, the attention was focused mainly on the third term and all that. And of course, resources also went, whether, at individual level or even as a government, one way or the other. He cannot also tell us that, because otherwise he would have come boldly to say, make definite statements, from the presidency to say that whoever that is championing that cause is not championing for him or group, whatever. But he didn't do that. He allowed that. So a lot of resources went into it, whether human or whatever material and other state resources, one way or the other. And so to that extent, it impacted on the political development of Nigeria at the time.
I'd like to interject very quickly, Professor, before I let you go, and I want us to talk about tenure elongation. Now, it's not a new thing. You see this in Cameroon, we've seen it in Equatorial Guinea, we've seen it even in Rwanda. Now, how common, of course, or why actually, is tenure elongation in Africa such a common attempt? And of course, how does this set Nigeria apart, or how does this differ in Nigeria?
Yeah, when you talk about tenure elongation and all that, of course, in the case of Nigeria, it is not easy. It's a very Herculean for anybody to even conceive it in the first place. But in other African countries, of course, we've seen tenure elongation. We've seen a lot of them who had stayed onto power, for almost life, so to say. We have seen that happen. Dictators, one way or the other, those who force themselves into offices and all that. But in the case of Nigeria, when we had this Fourth Republic till now, the issue of tenure elongation is no longer something anybody will contemplate. Of course, that of Obasanjo's administration was a lesson for even successive administration in Nigeria to even think about that. So for Nigeria, tenure elongation is not something anybody can ever conceive here, because it will never fly, no matter how much you deploy the resources. But for other African countries, of course, that has been happening one way or the other.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your insights on this matter, Professor. I'll let you go. Thank you, sir.